Hello and welcome to the Scottish Clans. My name is Clint. Thank you for joining me today. Whether you are looking to connect with your Scottish ancestors, you're a history buff looking to understand Scotland's wild history better, or you just watched an episode of Outlander and became curious, this is the podcast for you, my friends. Rather than discussing general Scottish history, I focus on the clans specifically. Some episodes are academic, trying to understand how clans worked, what they were, etc., and some episodes are telling the cool stories from Scotland's colorful past. Some episodes combine the two, so whether you're new to the subject or a professor of Scottish studies, welcome to the podcast. Now, I've got to give credit where credit is due. We're going to be talking about clans that fought or claimed to have fought at the Battle of Bannockburn and looking at whether they did or didn't really. I was inspired to do this by a video by Michael with Clans and Dynasties on YouTube. That's his YouTube handle, Clans and Dynasties. Really good channel, really good information. I've really enjoyed his videos. I've subscribed to his channel and have interacted with him a little bit too. There might be some collaboration in the future that we've discussed. We haven't got super serious about anything, but really good dude. It's got some really good content on there, so I really recommend you go check it out. Now, what this is not going to be is regurgitation of his video in podcast form. He inspired what I'm going to do, but the content's slightly different. Now, he looks at some original sources or nearly but not quite contemporary sources, but not too long after the fact, after the Battle of Bannockburn. Looks at different clans that claim to have been there, makes a list, also includes, because there is not an exhaustive list of everybody that showed up. So we don't have that. But we do have some of the higher ranking people that commanded the Battle of Bannockburn, to include Robert the Bruce himself, and where the troops they drew from came. I don't think I said that very well, but you get it. So for the different commanders, where were their fighters coming from? We do have some information on that, and so he does some, okay, well, here's the different clans that came from that part of Scotland, so either that clan or their ancestors were likely represented at that battle. Well, I'm going to take that a little bit step further, but not so expansive. I am going to, he provides at near the end of the video a list of the clans that claim to have been there. So what I'm going to do in this episode is I sampled a handful of them. I looked at whether they were actually a clan at that point, because here's the interesting thing about this time period where the Battle of Bannockburn happened. It happened in 1314. And the reason why that's an interesting time period is because that was in a formative stage for a lot of clans as we know them now. Now, some people say that the clans began sometime in the 1100s. And if you look at it from a certain angle, I think I agree with that statement. However, the kin-based society goes back a lot farther than that time period. But it is safe to say that clans, as we recognize them now with their current labels, such as MacDonald, such as MacDougall, such as Campbell, such as, go down the line, have their origin in their current recognizable form during this time period. Really interesting time. Some of the clans that we are familiar with today were already formed up and going as a clan by the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, and some were not. And so that's what I'm doing. So this is what I'm not doing. I'm not saying this clan or that clan was at Bannockburn or was not at Bannockburn. That's not my goal here. But my goal is just to say, was this clan formed as such by 1314 when the Battle of Bannockburn occurred? So that's where we're going to go with this podcast. I think these are in no particular order. I'm just pulling them off of Michael's screenshot of his video. It said, here's all the clans that claim to have been there. And I looked it up and looked for some kind of claim, and usually that was substantiated. So the first one I'm going to start with is Campbell. Now, I happen to have quoted, and have done a whole episode, at least one episode, on Stephen Boardman's Campbell's 1250 to 1513. Stephen Boardman is a scholar, a good, solid source on the Campbells. And from that book, we learn that the Campbells were an established land-holding kindred by the time of the Battle of Bannockburn. In fact, Neil Campbell provided one of Robert the Bruce's most stalwart and steady and loyal followers. And they were rewarded accordingly when he gained the throne and made good on it. So yes, the Campbells were established. And I go more into their origins, but I did a whole episode on it, so go back and check through my episode list on the origins of the Campbells, where I actually read straight from Stephen Boardman's book there. The next clan I'd like to talk about is the Douglas clan. The Douglases, looks like they were already an established kindred as well. I talked about them at length. I've actually hit them from a few different angles. We talked about the Douglases, the original border reavers. So go back and see an episode on that. But I also did, and actually I made a YouTube video out of it that has done pretty well for me as far as compared to my other videos. And it's a episode on clans that have a Flemish background. The Douglases are one of those. So yes, they came into Scotland with the other Norman families, but if you want to be nitpicky about origins, the Douglases were... I have everything scholarly that I've read on that. There's a consensus that they were likely from a Flemish background. All right, now the interesting thing about them is they don't come into Scotland with a Flemish surname. A lot of the Normans were coming in already having surnames. And so the clans that are descended from Norman forebears, they actually, you can trace that as a clan, as a surname back farther than a lot of the other Gaelic clans can. But in the case of the Douglases, they wouldn't take their surname until they got established on the Douglas water. Douglas is actually a Gaelic place name, referring to something along the lines of dark water or something like that. You can go look that up, but that's not my point. Is not to get into that too much. Just that they would take their name from the location, and so they would be a Flemish family with the Gaelic surname. So I think that's really interesting. But they were already well represented, and it's very similar, actually very comparable to the Campbells, because they provide us James Douglas, who was the original Black Douglas. Now, if I understand correctly, that was a name that the English gave him. The Scots called him Good Sir James because he was awesome for them, which is really, I don't know if ironic would be the right word, but King Edward I of England, if I remember my history well on him, I haven't studied him at length, but the English people loved him because he's great for them. The Welsh and the Scots hated his guts because he was really hard on them, and he was a very competent commander and leader. But so it depends on your perspective, whether it's Good Sir James or the Black Douglas. Anyway, he comes from a family with already had a surname and was already established, and we already see a kindred, a broader kindred. And I go farther into that if you go look back at Douglas's, the original border reavers. The next clan on my list are the Gordons. It's a singular clan. Anyway, I'm not going to get too far into grammar, but they, according to their history, have been around since Malcolm Canmore. Their acquisition of Strathbogie, farther north, which they later renamed Huntly, was for services rendered to Robert the Bruce. Originally, the Gordons were settled down near the border, and because they had been loyal to Robert the Bruce, he was very mindful of those who had supported him, and so he made sure that they were rewarded, and that's how they moved up north, which became their headquarters up there, their caput. And they established themselves, became eventually the earls and later marquises of Huntly, dukes of Huntly maybe. Either way, they became established up north and actually provided the heirs to the Earl of Sutherland. They became a junior branch of the family, becomes the Earl of Sutherland. I've done a lot of information on specifically the Earls of Sutherland versus the clan Sutherland and how that works out in a previous episode, so you can go check that. Anyway, so the Gordons looks like, yes, they were pretty established by the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, but not in their current location, which is actually true for a lot of them. The next one I want to mention, though, is the Keiths. Now, one of the most impressive castle ruins that are left in Scotland is Dunnottar. Such a cool, such a scenic, such an impressive and a romantic look to these ruins on the east coast of Scotland, south of Aberdeen. There's some stuff about the Keith origins that I read that is just straight up fairy tales. This whole thing about they descended from the Mackay tribe and like they can trace their unbroken lineage back to a Roman age, a Western Roman age tribe is a little bit far-fetched in my head, but they make the claim. It's in the Wikipedia article. I haven't checked all the sources that claim that, but I think that's craziness. What we do know, though, is that a man named Hervey de Keith, eventually he became de Keith, but he's the founder of the clan. He took his names from the lands that he obtained in East Lothian, and he lived in the late 12th century. So over 100 years before the Battle of Bannockburn, that would that'd make him a contemporary of Somerled, so that's interesting. Although he lived to a later date, died later than Somerled did. Therefore, the Keiths had at least 2 generations of a head start on the MacDonalds for becoming a clan by the time of Bannockburn. And I'll explain how that works out when I talk about the clans that are descended from Somerled, which will be going to have to be in the next episode. But anyway, it looks like the Keiths would have maybe had a couple generations head start because they were actually, their actual Keith ancestor was at the same time as Somerled. So we covered the Campbells. Were the Campbells a clan by this time? Absolutely they were. Looked like they were already developed. Looks like actually everyone that we've covered so far, the Campbells, the Douglases, the Gordons, and the Keiths, were all good to go. All established clans by this point. We're going to pick up with the Kennedys and then go from there. The Kennedys are an interesting clan because they fly right in the face of those who claim that clans were unique to the Highlands. I'm not going to go into that because I believe I've discussed it at length, and I have tons of other episodes you can look into for a discussion on that. I did recently listen to a BBC podcast with Murray Pittock in it, a Scottish historian, and in that interview, at the end of it, the interviewee, I can't remember her name, she asked him to state some of the major myths of Scottish clans. One of them, he said, is that they all spoke Gaelic. And by extension of that, now, this is interesting because where the Kennedys come from in southwest Scotland was Gaelic speaking, even though it was not considered Highland. Okay, so the lines are not comfortably and evenly drawn. The boxes and the little categories that we like to neatly put everything, they don't work here. And the Kennedys are a great example of that. They were Gaelic speaking up until the 15, maybe even well into the 1600s. At that part where the Kennedys held sway, I should say. And if you want to see some scholarly work on that, try Hector McQueen. In his Survival and Success, the Kennedys of Dunnottar, he provides a description of the Kennedys as a kindred from Galloway that accompanied Duncan. So Duncan is Fergus, Lord of Galloway's grandson. So they accompanied Duncan into Ayrshire as Duncan received the lordship, which later became the earldom of Carrick. So they were originally there out of Galloway, which if you look at the timelines on when that would have happened, the Kennedys would have been a kindred already established by the time of Bannockburn. All right? Well established by then. So am I saying the Kennedys were for sure there? No, they claim to have been, and they were indeed in existence. And that part of Scotland is where Robert the Bruce had his original power base, okay? So they may have been associated with him from an early date. I'll let you guys look into that. This is not meant to be discourse on the Kennedys, but there I gave you Hector McQueen as a scholarly source to study on them, and you can look more up on them. But they were a clan by the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, so it's feasible. Next one I want to talk about is, so this is kind of mixed up, the McFarlands. Now, the McFarland Wikipedia page does not claim that they were at Bannockburn. However, History of the Clan McFarland by James McFarland, which was published in 1922, does claim that they were present at the Battle of Bannockburn. Now, this is interesting because, and this is the clan that my ancestry from Clan McFarland was what sparked my interest in this whole topic. It was the genesis of the whole thing. Now, their ancestors, the McFarlands, come from a junior branch of the Earls of Lennox, a junior son who did not inherit the earldom, but did inherit the lordship of territory within the earldom of Lennox, which would be on the northwestern shore of Loch Lomond. And they held it by charter from a very early date, which they were one of the first clans to hold their lands by charter. So, but that was their ancestors. When they first got that land, there was no McFarland because Parlin, the namesake of the clan, wasn't there yet. It was just the younger brother of the Earl of Lennox who had inherited lands, and this close familiar association continued over the generations. Parlin comes later. In fact, Parlin, he died several years after Bannockburn. So he was, I don't know whether he was actually at Bannockburn or not, but if the one that you're taking your name from as a clan was alive during the battle, then there could not have been a clan McFarland at the time. They would have been followers of the Earl of Lennox. It is possible that there was a kindred called McGilchrist after a member of this family of the House of Lennox. There may have been a group of people starting to adopt the name McGilchrist until Parlin came along. I would really want to know. Parlin is not very well attested in the historical record, and I want to know why he was so awesome that the whole clan took their name after him, instead of continuing on with McGilchrist or just adopting the Lennox as a surname or something like that. Anyway, the McFarlands were not a clan by the time of Bannockburn, but their ancestors were very close, the very close family to the Earls of Lennox at the time of Bannockburn. Parlin was not very far distantly related to the line of the Earls of Lennox, and the Earls of Lennox were very, very stout supporters of Robert the Bruce. Part of his, after the disastrous Battle of Methven, and he was on the run, just scrambling for his life. Part of his route took him right through the Earldom of Lennox, and the Earl of Lennox was right there helping him escape his pursuers and making sure he got through in one side and out the other side of the territory of Lennox and out to where he could catch a boat, probably provided by Angus Og MacDonald, and shipped off to safety. So, their ancestors were absolutely loyal to Robert the Bruce, fought at Bannockburn, but they were not a clan at the time. So there's that. Next one, I want to talk to tons of cool content there, and I got to not turn it into a whole episode on the one clan themselves. I got to use some discipline, but there's all sorts of stories tied up in there, and probably provide great content for a future episode. But we're going to move on. So now we're going to go to the clans that were descended from Somerled. Now we're not going to really address the McRorys because they tapered out as a clan not very long after just a few generations after the Battle of Bannockburn, because you'd have good John of Ilas marries the McRory heiress. Now there's you can get tangled up a little bit on who should have inherited what, but the way it actually went was Anya McRory married good John of Islay and had kids by him. And one of those kids was Ranald, and he begets the MacDonalds of Clan Ranald. And through him, he inherits his mother's territory as the McRory heiress. And so the MacDonalds of Clan Ranald really they are the rebranded McRorys, basically. Their territory that became the MacDonald of Clan Ranald territory was what used to be the McRory territory. So we're not going to focus on the McRorys so much, but the other clans that do descend from Somerled, we've got MacDougall, MacDonald. We could go farther into MacIan of Ardnamurchan, the McAllisters. We're going to touch on specifically the McAllisters as one of the branches of the MacDonalds. Okay, so at the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, MacDonalds were probably starting to use the surname MacDonald, but it was just timeline, just chronologically, they were probably more like an extended family than a broadly established clan with with various branches all over the Highlands and Isles, like they would become later. So Angus Og, or Angus, that could mean the young or it could mean Angus Jr. That Og and Mor were often used as, what Mor means great in Gaelic, and Og means young. Sometimes that was used as senior and junior. Angus Og was the grandson of Donald. So his dad would have been the first person actually who was literally MacDonald, the son of Donald. Alistair, from whom descend the McAllisters of the Loop, was an uncle to Angus Og. So a younger son of the original Donald. So he would have also been a MacDonald. So you see the McAllisters, their ancestor, Alistair, was an actual MacDonald, son of Donald. So they were, but it's just that line did not adopt the Donald surname. They took their name from Alistair, but they come from the same family. But like I said, time-wise, at the time of Battle of Bannockburn, this is probably just cousins. And if you want to, I don't know, I've never set a rule, and I haven't seen anybody else either set a rule about how broadly extended this family's got to be before it's considered a clan. But so you can call them a clan, I guess. Sometimes I refer to my own like Clan Edwards, and I'm just talking about my grandpa and my family, parents, siblings, my aunts and uncles, cousins as Clan Edwards. You can definitely start looking like a clan depending on how many kids were born to the family at any given generation. But that's where the MacDonalds were at the Battle of Bannockburn. So now the MacDougals, and they're significant in this because they sided against Bruce. They almost, after, like I mentioned before, Robert the Bruce is scrambling for his life and trying, after the Battle of Methven, they pass through territory that's close to where the MacDougals hold sway. They ambush him and almost just undo the whole thing right there, do him in, the whole group. But they survive. They push through the ambush. The MacDougals were no friends of Robert the Bruce, partly because John Cummin III, the Red Cummin, was the brother-in-law of the chief of the MacDougals. Like I said, generationally, the MacDougals have one generation head start on the MacDonalds, as Dougal was Somerled's son, so the first generation after Somerled. And so Donald, who the MacDonalds take their name from, was his nephew. Were they a clan yet? I don't know. I'll let you guys decide that, but that's where they stand chronologically. So the MacDonalds, the McAllisters, who were the cousins, and actually their namesake would have been Donald's brother, and then the MacDougals. That's where they all are timeline and generationally. I don't know if that works. Maybe I ought to make a... Well, you know what I did? You know what you ought to do? You ought to go to scottish-clans.com/Somerled, and I've got a free PDF download that'll show you how that all lays out. And I've got dates in there so you can see where they were about the time of the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. So go check that out if you want to visualize that. If that got a little turned around for you, go get that free PDF download. I think it'd be helpful. That's why I created it. All right, let's move on to the next one. The McGregors. McGregors claim to have been at the Battle of Bannockburn. Well, according to Martin McGregor, a Scottish scholar, he says that Gregor, who is the eponym of the Clan Gregor, or the McGregors, flourished in the first half of the 14th century. What does that mean? Well, it's the same implications about Parlin for the McFarlands. It looks like maybe they would have overlapped lifespan-wise, but if the one you're taking your name from lives during the time, or maybe even slightly after, he doesn't give exact dates because I don't think they're to be had. If Martin McGregor can't find them, I don't think I can. He's paid to do that research. This is just a hobby for me, but if he doesn't have an exact date on it, the first half of the 14th century, that's a 50-year span. somewhere in there, he's convinced that that's when Gregor lived. So he may or may not have been alive at the time of the Battle of Bannockburn. And so therefore there was no clan Gregor at the time of the Battle of Bannockburn. Now, if that's true, then they could still have had ancestors who were in the Battle of Bannockburn. The clan, not as a clan McGregor. So that scene in Braveheart where they come running up, I remember this distinctly, and they say that they're the McGregors, and they're here to fight with William Wallace. Totally made up. Never happened. There wasn't a clan Gregor, if Professor McGregor is correct on this. All right, the Mackays. Now, on this one, we're going to give it to them. If they claim they were at Bannockburn, I'm not saying, once again, that they were there or that they weren't, but time-wise, I think they comfortably fit in here because during the 1100s, there was a series of rebellions in the very far north from the province of Murray. The rulers of Murray are supposed to have descended from Canal Lorne. So we're going clear back to Dalriada days, clear back to a kingdom that existed up until the Vikings came in, and they moved east, merged with the Pictish royal house, and became one nation of people, or one group of people with one king over them, instead of the Picts and the Scots of Dalriada. So that Canal Lorne, instead of pushing east and setting up there in the Perth, Scone area, they moved up the Great Glen toward Inverness, and you have this province of Murray. And one of the ruling kindreds up there were the Mackheths, Heth. And from the Mackheths, I believe, and I've seen a few other scholarly opinions on this one, that the Mackheths, see, Mackay, that name used to have a D or a DH on the end. At one time, it may have had a TH sound. That D may have had a TH sound. That's what I think that Mackheth is. Mackheth or Macketh it's an English, bringing it into English or Latin or Scots as Mackheth, but it was really an older version of the name Mackays. I believe they're the same group. I believe that the Mackheths were Mackays, and that they've been around at least since the 1100s by that name. And they were, after those rebellions were crushed, they pushed north and occupied Strathnaver, probably under the Earls of Caithness. All right, so I am convinced that the Mackays were plenty old enough to have been a clan by the Battle of Bannockburn. The Mackenzies, now the Mackenzies are tough. Whew, I tell you what, they don't enter the historical record until way late. There's such a dearth of any kind of evidence of them in the historical record. Even, and I've got the works of scholars to work with. Well, that is one little thing I want to add here. For the Mackenzie specifically, I've had the benefit of, he always signs his name to his papers in Gaelic, so I'm going to try to stick with him instead of just anglicizing his name, which would be Angus Mackenzie, but it's Angus McConaughey. I'm probably just messing it all up. I'm sorry if you're listening to this. He's probably not, because he knows a billion times more. But I have his writings to help out with the Mackenzies. Not all clans have somebody like him writing on their clan. So, and this would be his. He uses the Gaelic version of Mackenzie as he signs his papers. But even he digs into this, and I'll tell you what I found. It's hard to tell when exactly they formed as a clan. There's theories out there, but it looks like they might descend from a younger son of Galloway of the Ard, and began to take shape as a kindred in the middle of the 13th century, so 1200s. So if this is true, they would have been a young clan, but could have been about in the same stage of development as the MacDonalds were by the time of Bannockburn. Now, if you want to, like I said, go back and check out what we learned about the MacDonalds and where they were in the development of their clan. They would have been young, maybe not much more than an extended family, some cousins and stuff that may also be bearing the same surname. And surnames were mostly only borne by people of higher social status. But these people were, and they might have been starting to use that name. People were starting to use the name within a couple of generations of the person they're taking their name from. So grandsons, great-grandsons, right in there, they might be starting to use that. So right about the time of Bannockburn, you might have kind of an embryonic version of the Mackenzies. All right, so that's what I found about them. That doesn't for sure prove that they were there, but their founding father, if these theories are true about the descent and when and who everybody lived and all that stuff, we just don't have actual record of an actual Mackenzie on the record until the 1400s. It's way late, but they were up and going before that, before they appear on the historical records, but that's when we get it. All right, let's shift over to the Macintoshes, the captains of Clan Catton. Collins' Encyclopedia, let me back up. The Collins Scottish Clan and Family Encyclopedia, basically the Scottish Clan Bible. Not that everything in there is, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Go back and check out one of my very early episodes on sources for what I think about that. But it says that they supported the Bruce. The Macintoshes supported Bruce. It doesn't say specifically that they were at Bannockburn, but it says that they supported Bruce. Okay. But Professor Alison Cathcart, another Scottish professor that I have quoted from at length on this podcast, in a footnote of Kinship and Clientage says that Angus Macintosh would have followed his feudal superior Thomas Randolph to battle at Bannockburn on the side of Bruce. So if their traditional story is correct, and they were descended from Shaw Macduff, from the Fife Macduffs, who were the Earls of Fife at the time, then, and at that time, the Shaw Macduff participated in suppressing a rebellion in Murray in 1160. So this Shaw Macduff that they claim to descend from, and if he lived and he's in 1160 and he helped with this rebellion that's well documented, then they would have been well established as a clan by the time of Bannockburn in 1314. There are other theories to their origin. Just know that, okay? But if that narrative is true, that would have given them plenty of generations to be up and going by the time of 1160, or by the time of 1314. The next clan that we're going to look at is the Clan Murray. The senior line of Freskin used the style de Moravia. And I want to think that we see that form, that style pop up in documents, probably a lot of them which were originally written in Latin. And so we see the Latin form of the name. The Gaelic way of saying, it's basically saying of Murray, the province of Murray. They were given extensive land holdings for helping the Scottish king crush a rebellion up there. And in Murray, which had been a trouble spot for the kings of Scots. And so they plant somebody who they know is an effective and capable leader and is going to be a good person to have in a troublesome area. So Freskin, who some believe was a Flemish immigrant, we've done a lot of content in the past and other episodes on them, so I'm not going to go to too much detail, but he used the style, and his descendants used the style, de Moravia. In Gaelic, Moravia would be more like Murav, and in English it'd be Murray. And so you have most of the kindred is instead of, I wonder if outside of Latin documents, if they ever used de Moravia, if they just started to use some form of the province of Murray, and there we have it. Now, I just wonder if they're the same thing. The last name of Murray really is what was being used all along, and that's what this kindred is known for. A branch of the Sutherland line maintained the Murray surname and became the Murrays of Aberscores. And they actually became the military leaders of the Earls of Sutherland. Okay, but they retained the Murray surname. So if de Moravia equals Murray, then Freskin would have been the first Murray, with the senior line of his descendants adopting the territory-derived surname of Sutherland. So the senior line adopts the name Sutherland, and the junior line keeps the surname of Murray. And so, and they actually spread out all over. The Murrays become very powerful throughout Scotland. The Sutherlands are more localized, but still very, very big a very powerful kindred up in the far north of Scotland. As you're going north, you have Sutherland, and then after that, it's Caithness, and that's all you've got of mainland Scotland. After that, it's the Orkney Isles and then the Shetland Isles. Okay, so there we have it. So if you have a kindred calling themselves Murray, and really that's on the ground, not in Latin documents, how they are being referred to it by, then Freskin was the first Murray, and maybe just a few generations after him, you have this well established. He lived in the 1100s. That gives us plenty of generations leading up into the Battle of Bannockburn. So I'm going to go ahead and reach out on a limb and say that the Murrays were pretty well established by the Battle of Bannockburn. They could have absolutely, in fact, one of the major heroes, and he doesn't get talked about as much as William Wallace, but Andrew of Murray, or Andrew de Moravia, he's a part of this kindred. So how could we overlook that major fact that we have a member of this old by this time, or I should say established kindred, and playing a major part in the Scottish Wars of Independence and fighting valiantly alongside William Wallace. William Wallace has gotten a lot more attention than Andrew Murray or Andrew de Moravia, or however he went by interpersonally, not on the records, but so that I think it's safe to say that the Murrays were up and going as a clan by the time of Bannockburn. What about the Sinclairs? Their surname was in place with plenty of time for this Norman kindred to develop into a clan coming from their lands in northern France. Okay, so they were, some Norman families adopted place names that they gained territory in Scotland. Or a job name. The Stuarts weren't called Steward or Stuart until they had established themselves and from that position in Scotland. Coming into Scotland, they didn't carry that name. The Douglases, the Inneses, another two families that came in with the Normans, although they were Flemish in origin, they come in and then adopt their surnames from place names that they gained territory in. The Keiths may have had a similar story to them. But the Sinclairs they actually believed they came in to Scotland already bearing the name St. Clair. So that's plenty of time to have developed. So they probably entered Scotland, maybe even entered England with that name, and that gives them tons of time. They had obtained the barony of Roslin by the time of Bannockburn, but had yet to establish themselves in the far north, i.e. Caithness and Orkney. So the Sinclairs were absolutely up and going by the time of the Battle of Bannockburn. What about the Sutherlands? So this is the other, the Sutherlands and the Murrays are kind of two sides of the same coin. They are the senior line, as I mentioned before, descended from Freskin de Moravia, but they may have started using Sutherland as a surname in the first half of the 1200s. So this would give them a few generations of time before Bannockburn, all right? So when I say they may have started using the surname of Sutherland instead of de Moravia, on the ground they're starting to use this territorial name. De Moravia is a territorial name too, but a branch of the family gets a hold of Sutherland, and eventually that becomes an earldom, and they take their name from that and use that as a surname. So the Sutherlands were absolutely up and going, had plenty of time to develop as a clan prior to Bannockburn, and so therefore could have fought there. And then we have, and maybe they fought alongside their kinsman Andrew Murray. That'd be something to look into, and maybe some of you who are listening already know the answer to that, so that'd be awesome if you could reach out and let me know. That's all I got for the clans of Bannockburn. Marschen leven drasta.